Welcome to TheKillFile, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Spears. Each week, we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown because, in TheKillFile, nothing stays buried forever. Hello there, and welcome to episode 57 of TheKillFile. I'm so glad that you guys are back for another listen. Before we jump into today's episode, just a few quick reminders. This fall, probably more towards mid to late fall, I will be rolling out something called the Hidden Files, which is going to be some bonus content from me that you can pay a few bucks a month. They're going to be things that are a little different than just true crime, anything from natural disasters to assassinations, and one of the categories that I'm hoping to get up and running will be something called Listener Files. If you or anyone that you know has a true crime story that they are wanting to share with the listeners, email it to thekillfilepodcast@gmail.com. It doesn't need to be long, it can be on the lighter side, and you can stay anonymous if you would like to. I am looking for anything from a crime that maybe affected your town growing up. Maybe it's the reason that you started loving true crime. Maybe your next-door neighbor was a serial killer. Maybe your grandfather worked for the CIA and left some good family stories. Maybe your high school burned down because some little turd needed attention. Also, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe anywhere that you listen to get episodes every Monday, and it's also the best way to help out the podcast and boost it in the lists so others can find us. Follow us on any social media platform for extra pictures and content each week. I'm working on bringing you more. And lastly, don't forget to check out the website at thekillfile.com where you can submit a case for me to check out, or you can check out the merch site for some great true crime merch. Okay, that's it for business. Let's talk about today's case. Today we are going to be talking about a man that I have heard of before. I might have even heard this case before, but I don't remember it offhand, and I wanted to learn more. This is going to be a two-parter because there's so much information on this man, his crimes, and numerous theories of other crimes that he may have committed. We are going to be talking about a man named Gerard John Schaefer. Trigger warnings for today are going to be kidnapping, rape of a minor, necrophilia, murder, and abuse. Here we go. First thing that I'm going to say about Gerard John Schaefer is that his criminal record is a bit of an enigma, and that's because this man was technically only convicted of 2 murders. However, it's widely believed and accepted that he was in fact a serial killer with a body count of possibly over 15 people. Let's first talk about Schaefer's childhood. Maybe we can get some insight into what made him the way he was. One of the sources that I used for this case was a YouTube video from the Crime and Justice Network where a former FBI special agent named Dr. Brianna Fox, who is now a professor, researching psychological criminology and something called offender risk assessment, will give some of her expert and researched opinions on Schaefer. So if I tell you something to do with Dr. Fox, just know that's who I mean. I'm trying to get better at vocalizing my sources for legal reasons because, again, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I definitely don't want to get sued, but also because the people deserve credit. Look, people who do videos, podcasting, social media on specific topics, whatever, most of what we do is actually take other people's hard work, expertise, investigations, what have you, from the jobs that they have, and we research all of the information that we can find and compile it for you guys, the listeners. Obviously, we also write the stories, so that you don't have to go and research or watch a billion videos on a case to get the whole story. We as podcasters do that work for you so that you can sit back and enjoy the story or case without having to do anything. But being honest, that is what all of this is about. Unless you're a part of the police force, FBI, journalist, or like a documentary filmmaker, most of your work comes from other people's work. So I'm going to always encourage you guys to check out the sources that I leave for you all if you want to know more. I obviously can't give you every single detail of bigger cases especially, or we would be here for 5 hours an episode. That being said, the sources will always be in the show notes, and I hope that if you find a case interesting and want to know more, that you go check them out. Okay, so Gerard Schaefer was said to be the oldest child of 3 children born to Catholic parents, Gerard Schaefer Sr. and his mother Doris. According to Schaefer, Gerard Sr. had the job of a traveling salesman and seemed to be emotionally distant, as well as an alcoholic. The family seemed to move a bit throughout Schaefer's childhood, which in my own opinion can be hard on children to form those attachments when they're younger that are needed. Schaefer would also claim, according to the Big Book of Serial Killers, Volume 2, that one of the reasons that he wasn't as close to his father was because his father had always favored his sister instead of himself. He would also claim that he was never good enough for his parents and felt that he could just not live up to their expectations. Schaefer would engage in one of those telltale signs of the McDonald triad when he admitted that he enjoyed killing smaller animals, and not in a sense of like hunting or for like the skill, but more like he enjoyed killing them. Schaefer was said to mostly go to Catholic schools, and of course we don't know exactly what happened in those schools, but we have heard some horror stories from some of those religion-based schools back in the day. But he never really claimed anything from that, and there wasn't a lot of things from his past or childhood that would seem to have caused him to turn out the way he did. Many of the serial killers that we talk about have horrific childhoods with trauma and abuse, and not that it excuses anything, but sometimes we can point to things and it might help for us to understand why or how someone could maybe behave the way they do or in certain ways. But according to sources, Schaefer didn't have that type of childhood. Besides the killing of small animals, which is never good, Schaefer would end up becoming a peeping Tom. Now, I've said this before on this podcast, but I have learned time and time again that peeping Toms are sometimes what serial killers are first. So, a peeping Tom is just another term that is used for voyeurism, which is the act of being aroused by watching an unsuspecting person who is naked, undressing, or engaging in sexual activities, according to the Merck Manual, which is like a comprehensive medical reference for healthcare professionals. According to the doctor who wrote this section on voyeurism, it's not that the person wishes to engage in sex with the person that they're watching, but the act of watching or peeping itself, that's what's found arousing. Voyeurism, I guess, usually will begin around adolescence and sometimes into early adulthood. The manual states, quote, "Some degree of voyeurism is common more among boys and men, but increasingly among women," end quote. Maybe it's increasing as women aren't being shamed as often for having their own sex drives. Fuck the patriarchy. So obviously, if the victim is not consenting, then it is illegal to watch people undressed or have sex. When voyeurism becomes a disorder, it seems to be when the person is so obsessed that it consumes them. Famous serial killers such as the Golden State Killer, BTK, Ted Bundy, all of these were peeping Toms before they would go on to become serial killers. And I guess there's a book called Why We Love Serial Killers, The Curious Appeal of the World's Most Savage Murderers, that I'm considering listening to if there's an audiobook available. Well, the author, Scott Bond, PhD and criminologist, says in an interview for Oxygen True Crime that no one wakes up in the morning and decides that they're going to be a serial killer now. It's more like a part of an evolution of crimes that leads to the killing. I feel like the Golden State Killer is like a perfect example of this because, in my opinion, if you know his history and his crimes, it was like at first he was just breaking in and robbing homes, which then escalated to breaking in and raping women, and then robbing. And then, of course, he would move on to breaking in, raping, murdering, and still robbing. Clear escalation of crimes. There's a famous investigator that was on the Golden State Killer case named Paul Holes. Most of us infatuated in the true crime world probably know him and have listened to him on various podcasts, but something he said in the article stood out to me. He described the reason that serial killers kind of evolve in a way is because they're like testing the waters or overcoming their societal barriers that usually keep them from doing certain crimes. Maybe like each barrier they will cross gets bigger and bigger, which is what we call escalation into murder. It's interesting for sure, and it totally makes sense. Some peeping Toms, whilst they are using these lesser crimes as barriers, also use it as a way of having control or superiority over their victim. In the case of Schaefer, it would then escalate to stealing their underwear. Yeah, he's one of those guys. Look, I'm sorry, all sexual predators are disgusting and deserve to have their nuts taken off, but there is something so icky and creepy about a guy who steals women's underwear. And I'm not talking about it as like a fetish. By all means, do your thing with consenting people, pay for them, whatever, no kink shame here. But a guy who steals such a personal item from a woman is so scary. I mean, unless they're hanging their skivvies on a laundry line outside, the dude went into her home with the goal of finding her underwear drawer and stealing her undies, or even worse, finding the dirty laundry basket. So later on, when, spoiler alert, Schaefer is caught for his crimes, he would publish with what I believe was an old girlfriend who would visit him in prison. The book is titled Killer Fiction, and Sandra London was the woman. Part of the book is literally Schaefer's sadistic and masochistic, fan fiction, which includes some seriously disturbing drawings that he made as well. And they're like little stories that he created where the women were bonded or hanging, and one is even dismembered. Yeah, it's fucking awful, but I guess Schaefer would admit to becoming obsessed with death at some point, and even masochism, which, for anyone who doesn't know, masochism is when you get pleasure or sexual arousal and gratification from having pain inflicted on you or being humiliated. Again, no kink shame, do your thing. The BDSM community is a big one where people are free to explore their own sexual fantasies, and I actually think it's awesome. It's a safe and consensual way to explore those. So I guess Schaefer would admit to his own masochism by tying himself to trees, and then he would be aroused by this, and then I guess he would hurt himself. Dr. Fox would go on to say there was no seemingly red flags in his childhood or adolescent years of things that would have traumatized or inflicted things onto him or his psyche. She would also go on to say that the fact that Schaefer liked to kill animals purely for the pleasure of the kill is, quote, synonymous with psychopaths, end quote, meaning they go hand in hand. Going back to his girlfriend while he was a teenager, the one who co-wrote the book, Sandra London, it was said that while Schaefer adopted a personality that others would hopefully accept and like, such as being charming, he would also open up to Sandra about some of the concerning fantasies and allegedly admitted to her that he wanted to kill women. Him and Sandra were together for about a year. When Schaefer would go on to marry a woman named Cindy is when his more seemingly sadistic and violent tendencies in the sexual area would start to come out. One of the things that Schaefer was known to have done in his younger years, which back then may have been looked at a certain way, but now most of us wouldn't give a hoot, or at least shouldn't, he was known to have liked to dress in women's clothing. However, later on, Schaefer would claim that the reason he did this was in an effort to not be drafted into the Vietnam War. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not how that works, right? When I looked this up, there was a small list of ways that people would avoid being drafted, and clothing options were not one of them, but maybe it worked, who knows. He was with Cindy for about 3 years, but when Schaefer wanted to roleplay some of his rape fantasies by his desire to surprise attack her, rip off her clothing, and then he wanted to essentially rape her violently, well, I guess this was not for Cindy, which is understandable. But Schaefer still wants to, whether Cindy will be the person or not. Part of the things that Schaefer would fantasize or desire was to see women hanging while they evacuated their bowels, and he wanted to see the moment in which their life was taken as this was happening. Okay, this guy is a perfect example of the type of serial killer or serial predator, I should say, because he was never technically convicted as a serial killer or whatever. But he scares the shit out of me because he doesn't have the type of background that someone with this level of fucked upness usually has. So these are the cases where we all wonder, are people born this way or are they made? I personally believe, and I think many of us do, that it can be both, and sometimes maybe even a little of both together. One source would say that people in Schaefer's life might have recognized his lack of empathy as a character flaw, which is also obviously a telltale sign of somebody with psychopathic tendencies. The video I watched on the Crime and Justice Network had someone named Pat Brown, who was a criminal profiler, who said something I have heard before, but I wanted to touch on again. Pat explained that there's this misconception about serial killers that they aren't really living in reality, but that idea is not true. She goes on to explain that they know exactly what they're doing, and when I heard this before, I believe the person who said it said not only do they know what they're doing, they just don't care, and they like it. Pat Brown would go on to say that psychopaths usually end up being pathological liars, which is exactly what Schaefer did with his fantastical stories and lies that got him attention. Now we'll move on to Schaefer's adult years, as he would become a student at the Florida Atlantic University. This is when Schaefer would meet a student who also went there named Martha Fogg, and the pair would actually end up getting married. It was said that the marriage would only last a year. Another book written about this case called American Ripper, the author, a man named Patrick Kendrick, would go on to say that Martha actually would find a letter that Schaefer had written that seemed to be a suicide note, and this was around the time that Schaefer's behavior was becoming somewhat unhinged, and she would claim that he'd been in possession of guns as well. Obviously, this was concerning for Martha, so she actually took the note and brought it to one of the school's psychiatrists. This is when Schaefer was referred to a psychiatrist for evaluation, and not only did he discuss his fantasies, but he was diagnosed with depression as well, and Patrick Kendrick said that he wasn't diagnosed quite yet as a paranoid schizophrenic, but I guess that diagnosis did come later for him at some point. That actually makes me feel a little bit better. Well, kind of. Not that my fucking opinion matters at all, but at least if there's like a mental health condition, it can kind of explain some of the scary behaviors. But I guess we have learned from like the Greyhound bus case that people can attack you out of nowhere with these types of conditions, so does it really make me feel better? Probably not. Martha would end up filing for divorce from Schaefer for the reason of extreme cruelty. One source would talk about how Schaefer still couldn't detach his fantasies from his real life. As far as Schaefer's career, one source would talk about how he had become a teacher, but his behavior was deemed so inappropriate that he would end up being fired from that job. What do people who are inappropriate do instead? Well, they try to become a priest. That's what. Schaefer would try to become a priest in the Catholic Church, but they apparently turned him down because they didn't feel that his faith in their beliefs were strong enough. After this, he would turn his back on the Catholic faith and speak to the fact that he felt everything that he had been taught in the church and all of his schooling had been basically what he called brainwashing. I'm not going to touch on that. Schaefer has a hard time keeping jobs because of his odd behavior. So he would turn to a career where he would be able to have authority, power, and the control that he craved. First, by starting off as a security guard, and then, of course, moving on to becoming a police officer. He was accepted onto the force and graduated as a patrolman at the end of 1971, which is absolutely terrifying. Schaefer would go on to be married at some point to his next wife, a woman named Teresa Dean. He was an officer when she had met him, which could have added to the lure of Schaefer for a husband. Policemen and women are supposed to be people who serve the community, who want to protect and help others, and if you don't know what's lurking beneath the badge, then it probably would be easy to get caught up. Unfortunately for Teresa, it was later known that Schaefer would inappropriately talk about his wife with his colleagues, which is just so fucking disrespectful and gross. One example talked about on the documentary I watched was that he would tell his peers at work how he would come home from work sometimes, throw his wife over a couch, and then proceed to sodomize her. Ugh, that sentence hurts me to say out loud, for real. I really hope for Teresa's sake that this was something that she was into and not something that she felt like she had to do to please Schaefer, or worse, didn't feel like she had any say in the matter because she was his wife. Remember, this was back in the 70s, and things were viewed very differently and thought of differently as well. We know better, hopefully, now, but it hurts to think of what women went through back then. Complaints and problems would mount at his current station, and the chief was forced to give Schaefer a warning of possible disciplinary actions or putting him on some sort of like probation for his job because of how many problems he was having. While this was happening, Schaefer would apply to a different force. One source said that it was the Marin County Sheriff's Department. Schaefer was allegedly talking shit about his current chief, and when the chief found out, he fired him. The problem here again was this was the 70s, and there was no internet to run a check or find out information. Schaefer forged a recommendation letter in order to land his new job. The sheriff's department would later say they were so desperate for people in the department, but of course they never checked the recommendation letter or anything that would point to Schaefer being a problem on the job. Schaefer would use his position at his different forces to pull women over, use the excuse of whatever he said they did wrong, but then ask for sexual favors in order to let them go. Fucking gross. I guess while he was doing this to poor women, he would already start to take trophies from them, which he would later use to masturbate and relive the thrill of what he was doing. Of course, eventually, he will again escalate, and this is when Schaefer decided to get 2 women at one time, possibly forcing one woman to have to watch the other and vice versa. He may even have used the watching part as like a psychological horror for the other and just as a way to control his victims. On July 1st, 1972, Schaefer would pick up two young ladies who at the time were hitchhiking, and because he was a policeman, they probably felt more comfortable getting into his patrol vehicle. These two young ladies were Paula Sue Wells, who was 18, and Nancy Trotter, who was 17. He would actually go on to tell the girls on the drive that it was illegal to hitchhike in Marin County, which was a lie. He drove them to where they wanted to go, and then he told them that he would return the next day and bring them to the beach. The young women must have thought that it was awesome to have a police officer who cared enough about their safety to not only give them a ride that first day, but to also pick them up the next day and take them to the beach, where this time they wouldn't have to hitchhike. When Schaefer returned the next day to pick up the girls, he was in plain clothes and was driving a regular car, which the book Killer Fiction would say that this was a baby blue Datsun and didn't seem to be a police car. When the girls got in and asked Schaefer about the clothes and the car, he simply told them that this was his day off and he was off duty, and that's why. While they were on their way to the beach, he would tell the girls that he wanted to show them something. Red flag. The girls would claim that Schaefer asked them if they wanted to go see a Spanish fort that was on the river. And of course, curious and not feeling scared at all, the girls said yeah. Schaefer would eventually call a coworker from Marion County, Sheriff Richard Crowder, and would report to Crowder that he had done something pretty terrible and that Crowder was going to be mad at him. He then told this bullshit story of how he arrested two girls and then proceeded to tie them to a tree, but that one of them had gotten away. Crowder then told him to go into the office and report it to the shift manager, and Crowder headed out to find the girls. He would find them both still in handcuffs, while one girl was still swimming in the river, and the other had been walking along the road. Nancy would later say that Schaefer had turned on a dirt road, and that was when the first ping of nerves hit her, as she described him driving further and further, and this was going to see the fort. Oh, that fucking feeling of nervousness is awful, poor thing. Sue would then say, again, this is according to the book Killer Fiction, that she had started getting worried because the day before, when he had driven them back to where they were staying or whatever, he had told the girls not to tell anyone, emphasizing it multiple times to not tell anyone that a police officer was bringing them to the beach. Sue said when Schaefer turned down the road, that's when she realized that was suspicious. Always tell someone where you're going to be. Always, always. Even if someone tells you not to, leave a note in your room. Leave a note for your mom anyways. Do whatever to always leave a trace of yourself. After driving down the dirt road, Schaefer parked the car at the Spanish fort and they all exited the car. I wondered here if they had felt some relief after seeing there was in fact like a fort. Like that wave of, oh, thank God, maybe I don't need to be so scared. When they had gotten out of the car, the girls would say that Schaefer had doused them in bug spray before he showed them around the fort. When they were finished, Nancy would say they got into the back seat and everyone was just kind of sitting there in the car waiting. When Schaefer asked the girls out of nowhere why they had lied to him the day before, she described them being kind of shocked or taken aback. Like, what do you mean? The girls asked, what did we lie about? This is when Schaefer said that after he had met them, he checked their records, and it showed them both as runaways in the juvenile court system. Nancy then said during her interview with the investigator that this was, of course, not the case, so they both kind of started laughing, telling Schaefer that they weren't runaways and that their mom knew where they were. She then said she was 18 and that it wouldn't matter anyways, although I'm pretty sure one of them was still 17. This is when Sue would chime in and say that Schaefer then asked the girls if they wanted a free ride back to wherever they were actually from. And when the girls said no, they wanted to stay another week, Schaefer said that they had to go home, regardless of what they wanted, because their parents were worried, and then said if they resisted, he would arrest them. The girls didn't want to be under arrest or be in any kind of trouble, so they figured, okay, then we'll just take the free ride home, I guess. This is when Schaefer asked them if either of them had any dope on them, which both of the girls replied no to, and that's when he told them to get out of the car. Schaefer made the girls stand there while he went through Nancy's purse. Schaefer then asked Sue if she had anything on her, and she told him that she did. And this is when Schaefer asked her what she wore, which confused me at first, but then Sue said that he asked if she wore underwear, to which Sue said no. This is when Schaefer said that he wasn't going to be able to search her then because it would be illegal, but then said there was one thing that he could do, and he grabbed the handcuffs out of the car. When Schaefer asked Nancy what she had on, she told him that she had on her swimming suit underneath her clothes. Schaefer then handcuffed both girls, stating that he was placing them both under arrest for being runaways. The girls assumed that Schaefer was going to take them back to his police station or sheriff's office, but instead, they sat right there as he grilled them with questions and went on rants about dope and other topics. Then, he spoke to them about white slavery. Now, when he hit this topic, he would ask the girls how they would feel about being sold into slavery. He then told the girls how they would get to see the world, and it would be a good experience to be a white slave, which is fucking weird. Then, out of nowhere, he asked the girls if they would have sex with him for $150. The girls said, quote, "Not for all the money in the world," end quote. Hell yes. Then he kind of threatened that if they became slaves, that they would have to do it for free. After this, the girls went silent, and out loud, he had started talking about how much he would be able to get for each girl. He would ask them about their parents and if their parents would pay for a ransom, and then was saying that there's no crime without a victim and how often people disappear. He then threatened to kill the girls and put them in a deep hole where no one would ever find their bodies, and they would just continue to be missing people. Schaefer then ordered the girls out of the car, where he grabbed one of their blankets and ordered them to go into the field close by. When Schaefer had opened his trunk, Sue stated she saw various items in it that probably scared the shit out of her. She said he had ropes, things that could tie people up, and also some rags. He wanted to separate the girls, saying that he wanted to be able to trust them while he grabbed a friend, whatever that means. He ordered the girls not to scream as he laid the blanket down and gagged the girls. Nancy stated that Schaefer wanted her to lay on the blanket, but she just stood there, so Schaefer tied her legs and then threatened that if she tried to get away, he was going to kill her. He said he would find her out there and kill her. He then told her not to scream, and that if she did, he would come back and make the gag so tight, quote, "I would shit my pants," which, if you remember, was a fantasy of Schaefer's when a woman would die and lose her bowels. This is when Nancy would describe Schaefer taking her over to a tree, and this area was kind of swampy, seemingly, so he told her to stand on the root of one of the trees. So if you can picture like the kind of trees that have those big roots that come up out of the ground, they're kind of roundish. There are pictures of this. I guess Nancy actually went back to this place, and I think Sue did too, after all of this happened, to reenact what had happened for the authorities, and those pictures are all in the book Killer Fiction as well. I can't believe how brave these girls were, especially to do that same scenario again after being so traumatized. Wow. After he put Nancy on the roots of the tree, he tied a noose around her neck, securing it to another part of the tree. He knew that if she slipped in any way, she was going to hang herself, which is horrifying. He then started pinching her butt and trying to mess with her, and when she said not to, he told her he could take her pants off if he wanted to. When he tried to undo her zipper, she turned her back. She then started to slip off the root and started to strangle a little, and he pushed her back up on the root, told her not to scream, and then left her there. Nancy, being the badass that she was, started chewing on her noose and was able to shimmy up the root and untie herself, but because she was still handcuffed, she had to bend backwards to untie her own legs, but she did it. At the same time, Sue had been able to get the ropes off her own legs while Schaefer had been away from her, but the gag was still in place. When he returned to her, he told her he was going to also tie her to a tree and that if she struggled or tried to run, she would also hang herself. Torture. Instead of a root, though, he used like a slope on Sue, and when he asked how she liked it, she said it was hurting her because she thought she was going to pass out, so he loosened it a little. Which, how fucking weird is that? He is this psychopath who is obviously getting a thrill out of torturing these girls, but when she said it hurt, he loosened it? Weird. He then asked Sue if she had a venereal disease, to which she said no. He then peeped under her shirt and down her pants, and then laughed, saying to her not to try and run because he would only be a bit down the road, allegedly meeting the guy who wanted to buy the girls. When Sue asked why he wanted to sell them, he told her for the money. And when she mentioned it was wrong, he re-gagged her and told her not to lecture him. That's not what she was there for. Sue was able to get loose and saw that Nancy was also loose and had been walking down the road. Nancy explained that he never came back to check on her and that she had climbed on the roof of that fort, and when she saw his car still there, she ran to the river, and this is when she saw her friend in the trees. Sue was calling out Nancy's name, but Nancy explained that she had thought Schaefer was forcing her to call her name because he had seen that she had gotten loose and was trying to lure her back over there. So she didn't call back to her friend and she just kept going, but this time faster. When Nancy thought someone was after her, she took off running, all the while being scraped and beaten up by the brush and trees and bitten alive by mosquitoes. She finally saw the road on the other side of the river, and even though she was handcuffed, she was able to still cross the river with who knows what was in it, because this was Florida, for fuck's sake. And she got to the road where Sheriff Crowder had picked her up. Sue would say that after she saw Nancy, she was scared to yell again because Schaefer could be not far. Sue stated she still had the noose on her, as well as part of her legs still having rope on them too. When she was able to free herself, she would run through the woods and the river, still handcuffed, gagged, and her arms were bound with a scarf. I can't imagine how hard that would be. All I was wondering at that time was where the fuck was Schaefer, and how scary it must have been to run. When she found a dirt road, she ran while she was crying until a guy in a truck stopped, and then the police came. The girls feared, of course, that he was going to come back, rape them, and kill them. Apparently, Schaefer had left to go back to work. And how can that be if he noticed one of the girls had been gone? He, of course, had tried to use the excuse of trying to show them how scary hitchhiking can be, and said that it was all for trying to teach them a lesson. Schaefer was then fired and charged with kidnapping. However, it would be reduced to false imprisonment and aggravated assault, probably because of his position as a law enforcement officer and because his record was clean. After his trial for these crimes, where the girls did testify against him, which good for them, he would receive 6 months in jail. 6 fucking months for what he did to those girls. And let's not forget, he knew if one of them slipped from where they were tied up, they would hang. How is that not attempted murder? The girls during the trial talked about how Schaefer seemed to have 2 sides to his personality. How he went from being a friendly cop and offering them rides to this sadistic killer. After the trial, Schaefer's lawyers asked the courts if Schaefer could start his prison sentence after the holidays that were quickly approaching and have him start it in January. The courts approved it, and this would end up being a big mistake. It's pretty clear that what happened here was not an arrest gone wrong or an officer stepping too far over the line. It's exactly what it seems. A man playing out his fantasies that he had not only talked about and written about, but also dreamed about for a long time now. Of course, he's going to act on it. The fantasies and stories won't be enough one day. It's always that way. Escalation. In the book Killer Fiction, the author Sandra speaks to the fact that she herself hasn't, at the time of writing her book, been able to make it through all of the sexual fiction writings that Schaefer has done, although they are published in her book. Let me explain why she probably couldn't, with just the title of one of them being Blonde on a Stick. Yeah, I read that one. It's more of a poem, but it's weird and awful, trust me. In her book, Sandra says, quote, Schaefer suffers from some kind of halitosis of the soul, and the stench quickly induces disgust, end quote. Oh my God, what a sentence. I believe it's what her first chapter in her book is called. She's dead on in her descriptive language, and I love it. Dr. Fox speaks to the fact that Schaefer is so dismissive of his crimes, trying to prove, even to his own boss, that his actions weren't that big of a deal, and she believes that had the girls not escaped, this would have turned into a double murder. This is possibly the time that Schaefer would know that his time was quite limited. So, in September of the same year, this is 1972 still, and this is during the time that he is awaiting for his trial for the kidnapping of Sue and Nancy, Schaefer would strike again. And that, my friends, is where we are going to stop for part 1 of Gerard John Schaefer, the monster who will go on to do much more heinous crimes that we are going to delve right into next week during part 2. This guy, right? I can't even tell you how much his fantasies, the book, all of the information that I was able to find on this guy, brought me into his world, which doesn't happen to me often for cases, and I'm going to talk about this probably a little bit more next week. I just have to say that there is a wealth of information out there, and this episode could easily be 5 hours long. So if you guys are interested after next week's episode, because no spoilers if you don't know the story, or even if you do, maybe it's been a long time, I also look up current information in case things have come out. then maybe after that you guys can check out the book or check out some of the information. I'm going to link all of my sources in my notes, so feel free to check all of that out. This guy is such a piece of shit, and I really like that we get to kind of understand his psyche a little bit more with why he does the things that he does. It's fantasies. Why does it always come down to sex? It always does. Cults, sex. Serial killers, usually sex. Like, what is the fucking problem? What is it with the men, at least? Control, misogyny, the domination aspect. Like, what is your fucking problem? And why is this ego what carries you through your day-to-day life? Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this first part of a twisted story that we are going to finish next week. And I hope you guys come on back for part 2 of Gerard John Schaefer, right here on The Kill File, where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today. A few quick reminders before you go. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on your platform. It will help The Kill File and other true crime lovers find us. Also, check out the website at thekillfile.com to suggest a case. Find our merch shop for fun Kill File gear, which you can also find at thekillfile.printify.me and help support the podcast. Have a suggestion or want to share your own true crime stories? Email thekillfilepodcast@gmail.com for a chance to get them read on the podcast. Follow The Kill File on your favorite social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Instagram, X, Blue X, TikTok, and of course, you can subscribe on YouTube as well. Find all of the links for the socials on the website. We are either listed as The Kill File or The Kill File Podcast. Come on back Mondays wherever you get your podcast fix when we will cover another case here on The Kill File, where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.